It's Lucy Litch, and this is Tiny House Conversations. It's the Australian-based podcast where I interview experienced tiny houses, tiny builders, and adventurers in the tiny world so you can discover how to create, build, and transition into tiny life. So you want to go tiny, but you might be wondering, where can I park my tiny house? I want to let you know that I have a special unreleased podcast episode of tiny house parking success stories from other tiny houses who were just like you and who have easily managed to find a long-term parking space for their tiny home. Some of them have even found more than one space. So if you want ideas on finding a parking space for your tiny, you can download this episode for free. To get access to it, head over to tinyhouseconversations.com/tiny parking. If you enter your details there, I'll send it straight to your inbox. Now let's intro today's episode. Hey, it's Lucy back with another episode of Tiny House Conversations. Today I'm speaking with Jessie Anyan, the Managing Director of King Domes, who are glamping dome specialists based in Sydney. I actually got to see one of their domes at a recent Tiny Homes Expo, and they're just so cool and unique and interesting. So I wanted to bring Jessie on the show to tell you more about them. And in this conversation, we talk about what glamping domes are, what they're made from, how long they last, how to care for them and all that kind of thing. The multi-purpose uses for King Domes models. We also talked about what the deal is with domes and council regulations, how you can connect with water, power, sewage, and off-grid solutions with these domes. And perhaps my favorite part of the conversation, we talked about playing our part in land conservation, contributing to the wider community and a better world for all, and so much more. You'll really get to feel and hear Jessie's passion and heart-centered mission when it comes to what he's doing out there with King Domes. It's not just a glamping dome business. It's so much more than that. And I can't wait for you to hear it. So with all that being said, on to this tiny house conversation with Jessie. Jessie, welcome to Tiny House Conversations, and thank you so much for being here with me today.
No worries at all, Lucy. I feel very pleased to be here. It's exciting times.
Definitely exciting to have you. And now, Jessie, you run an eco-accommodation structure business where you have these glamping domes of sorts, and your business is called King Domes. And what I'd love is to hear a bit more about your background, how you came to create King Domes, and then secondly, for anyone that's not familiar, can you maybe describe what these kinds of domes are?
No worries at all. We'll start with the second part of that question. Basically, King Domes specializes in different styles of primarily glamping accommodation domes, but that's not to say that they can only be used for glamping accommodation. The domes themselves, they're completely transportable. They vary in size. They have quite an extensive accessory list that comes with them. They're very versatile, very durable. Going into where we started with King Domes, funny enough, I had taken my partner for her 21st birthday to a glamping accommodation for the weekend. Not gonna say what the type of structure it was, but absolutely loved the experience that we had with them. But I wasn't too impressed with the structure itself. It was very flimsy to a point where I felt like if heavy enough wind came along, it would fall on top of us. But absolutely loved the idea of glamping and fell in love with the concept from there. I've always had a thing for nature in the past, and I'll get into that a little bit later as to the different reasons why I built King Domes. But I've always wanted to run something in my life, and I've always wanted to make some form of a positive impact, especially on the natural world, because this world is the only world that we have, and I think it's our duty, our responsibility as human beings to maintain not just the status quo, but maintain the vitality and the life of the natural world, both in animals and in nature itself. So doing a lot of research into the current market that Australia has, there are very few selections when it comes to glamping. Glamping in in a general sense in Australia is still very much in its infancy stage. And so I thought, well, this is my opportunity here. So I did a lot of research into the international market. Gosh, the list that I think I had about 15 different types of structures that I was very interested in. Even to the point where I've always wanted to do like an American style school bus, train carriages, tiny homes, log cabins, bell tents, safari tents, all these different sort of structures. But then I fell across geodesic dome structures and did a lot of research into the pros and cons of them. And after that sort of research, I basically went, well, value for money, the bang for your buck, you just cannot beat domes in general. Basically, they're very strong, they're very sturdy, they're very spacious. You don't need any interior walls to hold the roof up. So basically, you just start with a shell and you just let your imagination flow with how you want to deck it out, basically. Did a lot of research into the Australian standards, the national construction codes, the building codes, all these different various headaches, basically, as well regulated that the Australian government is and the state governments are. And then obviously, as we'll go into, which everyone who's familiar with the tiny homes industry is well aware of, even local councils can be quite a headache. They are there for a reason, which is great. Well, I won't get into that too much at this stage. Just pretty much put all the time, effort, and research into building this company. And the name King Domes just came from an epiphany, basically. I was just sitting there one morning, sitting at my dining table, had a tea in front of me, and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I've done all this research. I know this is exactly what I want to do. I want to make change in this world using this business model, but what am I going to call it? And then I was just running through all different scenarios, and then bang, King Domes hit me. But it was from a king, like kingdom, not King Dome. So kingdom, king of his kingdom. And then bang, King Domes came to my head, and we've been going hard ever since. Going into the background, in my young life, I've had many different occupations. I've done many sort of blue collar jobs. I've managed a couple of restaurants in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I've been a table games dealer at the casino, removalist. I've tried plumbing, electrical work, personal training even. So I can't really say that my background experiences have really molded me into King Domes today too much. It has given me a bit of a know-how into getting onto the tools sort of thing. But for the general part of it, I think that was just my life experience and working out what I don't want to do so that I could find something that I do want to do. King Domes has been 4 years in the planning. We're now coming up to about 18 months operational, live to the public. And we're growing, and we're growing at such an exponential rate. And it's great because I battle constantly with, which I'll get into a bit later, but battling with the fact that I don't want to just be a business. I don't want to just be a company. I don't want to just be here to make money. I want to be here to make an impact on this world. And sometimes I have to catch myself and say, well, in order to get to that stage, you have to grow this company. Doing what I can to get get not just King Domes' name out there, but the whole off-grid, frugal living, cheaper alternative forms, unconventional forms of living, and also making an impact on preserving the natural landscape while also making money. Because as much as people love to say that money is the root of all evil, unfortunately, it very much is the case that that this is how this modern society works. Is evolved around money, and in order to survive, you need to make money. Which hopefully, with this movement, we can start proving that living off grid, you don't really need as much money to live, survive, not only survive, but thrive and be happy as well. Yes, that's pretty much a short take of what King Domes' inception is and where it came about to be.
That's great. There's so many great things that you said in there. And I love how you talked about, firstly, you mentioned the natural world and having this as human beings. I always talk about self-responsibility and, the more that we're able to, I guess, lighten the load and reduce or be conscious of our impact, whether it's through what we consume, how we live, how we treat the earth, how we treat other people, and all of those types of things. I really resonate with that kind of outlook on life and that philosophy. And it sounds like you've had, all sorts of colorful experiences. And I would dare say that even though you mentioned, I don't know that it would, directly help you with what you're doing, I would also maybe say that perhaps on some level it does, because everything that you've done, all your unique experiences have molded you into who you are now, and who you are now is who is able to have this capacity to run this company and to have this vision and to be like this, what you're saying, more than just a business and more than just a company. Like, you actually want to make this impact on the world and other people. And I think that's so cool, because it's a bit of a minefield out there these days. And, with the cost of living increasing and housing prices and all sorts of stuff, and then a lot of people turning towards businesses and stuff, it's really cool to come across businesses like you that have this desire and intention to really want to help people, and being in this alternative living space, whether it's tiny homes, different types of alternative structures, off-grid living. I feel like this is where we're headed in a very big way. And maybe it's not going to be for everyone, but there's definitely, especially in the last couple of years, so many more people turning towards like, well, how do I want to live? Like, we were just talking offline before about moving out of the city, and, and I think there's a lot of people thinking that similar way, and then also not being able to afford to live in, a big 4-bedroom house or an apartment or something like that. So to have something like a tiny house, a caravan, a king dome, a glamping dome, that kind of thing, I think it's such a beautiful time. And I saw one of your domes in the Sydney Tiny Homes Expo a few months back, and I thought it was so beautiful, and it's such a unique offering. And you mentioned before that it's not just for glamping. What other types of things are people using these domes for?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lucy. So starting off, obviously, glamping accommodation is one thing. My partner and I are looking in the next, I'd say, month or so, building our largest structure actually to live in, which is definitely pushing towards a more frugal living without having to jeopardize on comfort and luxury. Other sort of conventional uses, we've got a client using it as a commercial grade yoga studio. You can have them in your backyard. We do have multiple sizes available. The smallest ones you can fit quite easily in a backyard. You can use those. We actually have one because we're based in Sydney ourselves. We've got one in our backyard that we're currently using as our home office, but you can use them as backyard entertainment spaces, office spaces, your home businesses, even kids' play areas. People have been using them. We've got clear options as well, so completely transparent covers. People use those either as greenhouses for cafe sort of seating, spa rooms, meditation spaces, hobby rooms, home gyms. Basically, because you have such a large space inside. Just to give an example, our 10-meter dome, which is the largest of our king domes range, we can actually go larger if people want to go. That just goes into a custom route, because of the joys of what a dome is you're basically just expanding what currently is on offer. But just to give an example of our 10-meter dome, your area, the floor space there, you're looking at 78.5 square meters of floor space, 5 meters roof height, with the ability you can put mezzanines or loft spaces inside, which obviously increases that floor space as well. And just in sheer volume, you're looking at over 260 cubic meters of floor space. It's hard to grasp those numbers, even in photos, let alone on a podcast or a video. Once you experience in person, like every person, which I'm sure you would have been the same thing, Lucy, when you saw us at the Tiny Homes Expo, you just walk in and you just go, wow, like this is enormous. This is amazing. This is so different. We don't try to limit people's imagination when it comes to the domes themselves, because essentially you can use them for anything. We've had people inquire for using them for cat sanctuaries. We've had people inquire to use them for holistic care. Just so many different examples that we just physically could not list these down, because every time we list something, a new one pops up and a new one pops up. That's just the joys of what these domes can really bring to the general public.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it takes away from having to maybe before you would have to go and hire a space, and continually pay rent on a space if you wanted to have somewhere to do whatever it might be that you're doing, whether it's for your job or a hobby or you're seeing clients or yoga. And now you're kind of giving these domes open that option for, I guess, self-sufficiency in a way in that respect too. And I'm curious, so just from like the physical structural features standpoint, so what kinds of materials are the domes made from, and how long do they typically last?
Yep. So the materials that we use, we'll start with the framing itself.
Yeah.
So the framing is a powder coated steel. Depends on what size that you're going for. It varies on the gauge of steel and the diameter of the steel beams themselves. But they're all powder coated steel. Then to put the frame together, we use all different styles of hardware, usually galvanized bolts, nuts, washers, those sort of things. Some of the sections just for the aesthetics of it, and typically because they're more exposed to the water, there are stainless steel hardware pieces as well. And then for the cover itself, you're looking at PVC fabric. We're looking over time, because I'm well aware, unfortunately, that PVC has a lot of pros and cons, and PVC in terms of its durability, that's pretty much the only part of the dome that pretty much degrades over time, as with any sort of plastic in the sun, especially the Australian climate with such a variable climate situation that's in this country. You're looking at such a wide range of the life expectancy. We give about 8 to 15 years for that cover. But the good thing about the domes is that you can simply replace the cover. So you pull this cover off, put a new one on, and then you're good to go for that same time frame. When it comes to all the accessories, the biggest ones to note are the insulation and the curtains that come with our domes as well. So they're all just polyester fabric. The insulation itself is it's on the inside of the dome, but on the outside of the insulation is just an aluminium bubble sheeting that acts as a reflector panel in between the outer cover and the insulation to sort of trap the heat at bay, so that it keeps it nice and warm in winter, but then it helps to alleviate that heat in the dead of summer as well. Yeah, so 8 to 15 years. That the structure itself, because it's powder coated steel, that should just last indefinitely, basically. That's not to say on like really coastal areas there could be potential with anybody who does live right on the water. They're well aware of the fact that they have to clean glass every 2 days just to maintain it, and doesn't matter if it's powder coated steel or if it's aluminium. Things do tend to rust, but for the majority of people who are erecting these domes, they're definitely in more rural areas. And as such, yeah, that should be fine. And if you really want to get the longevity out of the cover, you just either keep it out of the dead of the sun itself, whether that's positioning it in a place on your property that doesn't get that mid-afternoon sun. 12 to 3 o'clock is obviously usually the worst of the sun. Either that, or you put a shade sail over the top of it, basically, and then you can actually extend that life expectancy quite substantially as well. Which obviously adds to the green factor as well, because you're not having to getting rid of the cover. But other than that, yeah, it's quite a very strong, durable structure itself.
Yeah, sounds like it. And what about the best way to clean them in general and maintain them? Like you did talk about, keeping the cover out of the sun and all that kind of stuff. But what else can you do to kind of ensure their longevity over time?
We recommend cleaning the domes roughly about 3 months, just to ensure its longevity and life expectancy. It's not just the UV rays that degrade the cover over time, but it's things like leaves, the oils from the leaves, dust, anything that the wind can bring with it, especially when you're closer to sort of major capital centers. Air pollution is a very real thing, and when you're for the people who are in cities in comparison to people who are out in more rural areas, you can definitely tell such a large difference in the air quality itself. But to clean it is actually very simple. It's just, when I say simple, when you've got a 10-meter dome that's 5 meters tall, it looks quite daunting, and it's like, well, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to get up there? But the joys is that because it's such a sturdy structure, you can just lean ladders up against the side of it. To clean it is simply just dishwashing liquids, warm soapy water, basically, for times where the entire East Coast is well aware of the situation that we've been having for the last several months with rain, and with the rain and the constant rain brings a lot of mold and mildew. The good thing about the PVC itself is because it's such a tightly woven fabric, it doesn't actually penetrate. So it could sit on the outside of the dome, it could sit on the cover itself, but it won't actually penetrate like it would with, say, canvas, because canvas, very durable material. That's where we drew the line in the sand, and basically said, well, that would be out in long term, because I've seen a lot of other tent manufacturers that do focus on the glamping industry, and I've seen a lot of their tents after, say, 1 or 2 years, and they're just covered in mold, and it's just near impossible to try and combat that. That's where the domes come into play. But for the inside, yeah, we've had real world experiences where there has been slight mold occurring on the insulation themselves. What we pretty much do is we just spray vinegar on it, leave it for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then you just get a damp rag and you just wipe it off. If you do have the means to be able to get it out into the sun when it eventually does become sunny, yeah, that helps to eradicate it as well, which is great. But other than that, the curtains themselves, depending on which size of dome you're going for, you can either fit them into a conventional washing machine. We just recommend putting on a nice gentle cycle and then just letting them air dry, or you'd have to take it more to a dry cleaner, because our 10-meter dome curtains, for example, even our 8-meter dome curtains are, I think, 4.5, 5 meters tall. So it's they're grand, which you must have seen at the expo themselves, but they are absolutely gorgeous. But trying to shove that into a washing machine can be quite an arduous task. Yeah, that would be the best case scenario. But other than that, very, very straightforward to clean.
Okay. And, you talked a little bit about mold there. So speaking of mold, I do have anyone that's interested, episode number 28, Mold Proof Your Tiny Home with naturopath Amy Skilton. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, as I'm sure that would be really helpful for this scenario too with these domes. And you mentioned a bit before, so, we've had on the east coast of Australia, there's been the floods and the extreme weather conditions. So how do these domes fare up in, say, extreme winds, or in climates, or maybe just in seasons where it is really hot? Or it is really cold? I know you did talk about insulation, but is there anything else you can share about that?
Yep. So we'll start with the wind side of things. These are all great questions. In terms of wind, all of our domes are rated, Australian standards rated to 120 kilometre hour winds. But that's not to say 121 kilometres an hour later, it's just going to turn into a balloon and fly away sort of thing. Australia, being Australia, has very strict regulations, and that's where it just sits comfortably, indefinitely at a speed of 120 kilometers an hour. The same standards, for example, in the US, you're looking at 144 to 166 kilometers an hour. In terms of the structures themselves, it's not the structure that gives way. It's actually the connection with the dome itself and the foundation that it's sitting on, because all of our domes, in order to meet those requirements, have to be sitting on some form of a structured foundation. We usually put them on either concrete slabs or timber decks, but there are also steel framing decks that you can put them on as well. But those are the main two that Australians typically go for. There's a lot of difference in between the two, but yeah, as a general guideline, that's what they sit on, where they sit quite comfortably. Because of the shape of the dome itself, the wind doesn't bash into the side of the walls; it wraps around it. So it's very efficient when it comes to wind. Rain, not an issue, because the cover itself is all one piece. It's all completely waterproofed. The only openings for the domes themselves are just the accessories that go in, which we have, for example, our solar extraction fans and our porthole windows all have clamping systems, both on the in and outside, and then you just run a line of silicone like any other sort of conventional building. The only opening to the outside world in regards to water is underneath your door, which is pretty standard, because you need the door to be able to open and close. And if it's dragging on the floor, it turns that into a bit of an issue. We actually have what we call press bars, which go around the outside perimeter of the dome and actually anchors the cover from the outside and then clamps that to the ground, to the foundation that you're building on. So it creates a seal so that no water, wind, or insects or snakes or spiders can get inside the dome. What we usually recommend doing, which we do give as standard with all of our domes anyway, is some silicone tubes just to go back on the inside of the dome and run a line of silicone around the bottom. So that just really, really holds that gap anyway. In terms of hail and storm, hail, it has been tested through things like golf ball size hailstones. Anything golf ball size and under is fine. Because the PVC cover is very durable, they simply just bounce off. They're nice and easy. We haven't tested it in real world situations with things like baseball size golf balls. I'm not really looking forward to the day when it does happen, because it's not just the domes you have to worry about, but it's pretty much anything. I don't think many people can come out unscathed with with baseball sized hailstones unless they live in a concrete bunker, in which case good on them for being that lucky. Pretty strong, pretty durable. I would not be setting these up next to gum trees. You know, the unofficial name Widowmaker is there for a reason. They should be able to survive an impact if they were falling lengthways, but if they were falling straight into it, it would just pierce straight through the cover. But to give it a real world example of the structural integrity of the actual frame itself, when we're doing an expo in Melbourne, the same Tiny Homes Expo just down in Melbourne, we only had 24 hours to erect this dome. And so we had 15 people climbing the structure to pull the cover over, which was absolutely magnificent. We've got a video on YouTube somewhere, just really showcasing the strength of what it can hold quite comfortably. What was the other? Oh, sorry, Lucy. What was the other part of the question?
That's okay. So it was just about the weather. So you talked about the wind and then you talked about the rain. What about things like extreme heat or even bushfires and that kind of thing?
Yep. Okay, so starting with the variable temperatures that Australia is well known for, I'm actually sitting currently in the snowy mountains of regional New South Wales, southern New South Wales. So it is very cold down here. It's only going to get colder. The accessories that come standard with the domes, we've mentioned the insulation. We've got the blackout curtains. That just helps because we've got the nice big bay window at the front of our domes. As with any sort of transparent window, draws and loses quite a substantial amount of heat. So those blackout curtains help to alleviate that, especially which we had at the expos, people trying it out for themselves where they're drawing the curtains open, standing in the bay window, and they can feel that heat bearing on them. Then they close the curtains and it just alleviates it quite substantially, which is awesome. There's other accessories that we can add to the domes. So for heating the interior of the domes, you can put wood fire stoves inside the domes themselves, which is a great addition. It really complements the whole off-grid glamping style of living, basically. We've actually partnered up with a company called Pivot Stoves to ensure the entirety of this system meets Australian standards, which was quite a big thing for us because councils were looking at our structures and then looking at putting, like when you're trying to put a combustible fire inside of a dome or any sort of structure, there's a lot of potential liabilities there, and not just with council, but with things like insurances as well. Ensuring that Australian standards compliance was a big win for us, which was awesome. So for all of our sizes, 6 meters and above, you can put wood fire stoves inside of. In terms of cooling, the actual domes themselves, just the domes, without having to put any sort of energy inside of them, we create so much ventilation inside, from the solar extraction fans to ventilation ports in the roof, which are constantly open, but it doesn't allow any sort of weather to get inside, as well as bugs. And then the openable windows themselves. On all of our doors, all of our single doors, they come standard with a magnetic fly screen mesh as well. Everyone loves that nice draft coming through the fly screen doors in the house. We've just incorporated that into our domes as well. It's for those who have the luxury of affording solar panels / batteries capable of powering air conditioning systems. Split system AC units are great additions to the domes as well. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Anything over 32, 33 degrees onwards can get quite warm in there. What the killer of the inside of the domes is more so stagnant air. So as long as you have either external air, or you have air conditioning, or you even have fans just helping to push the air around the dome to let the hot air escape, which is why we have so much ventilation in the roof itself. And with the high roof heights as well, it's a lot more bearable when you're standing when you're down on the ground, as opposed to up in the ceiling sides of things. Yeah, we've definitely thought about the huge variables that Australia is, from far north Queensland down to where I am in the Snowy Mountains, down to Tasmania as well. We definitely cater for all seasons in the same dome. So,
we already talked about some of the different purposes that people are using or can use these domes for, and I'm wondering, how can they be connected to mains power, water, and sewage if necessary?
The short answer is absolutely. Like any sort of conventional dwelling, any sort of house, garage, sheds, granny flats, all your services, whether you're both on or off grid, will simply run through the floor. How you design the interior of your dome is entirely up to you, but I'll use the example of living accommodation. In this particular example, you would have your kitchens, bathrooms, bedrooms, lounge rooms. All of these would need to be powered both with electricity. They'll need to be connected with water, and they'll also need to be obviously some form of water. What's the word I'm looking for?
Like grey water or something like that.
All your grey and black water systems as well. Yeah. Those are all fed through the ground. In terms of the service connections inside the dome, you're simply just running these through your interior walls. So the good thing about the domes is that if you're building interior walls, they don't have to be structural, like load-bearing walls. So the walls are actually very straightforward to put together. Nice and easy. You just feed your services straight through those walls, and then you just have your connections coming out of those walls. It's typically like a conventional house. So that's very straightforward, that one.
Okay. And then you did say as well about solar panels and batteries and stuff like that. So obviously people can go off grid, and then I'm assuming as well, they can go off grid with power. I'm assuming composting toilets and those types of things that people are wanting to manage their black water that way. That's also, that should be okay. Or what would you say about that?
Oh, of course. So there's two routes that people can go in terms of building our domes. So as I mentioned earlier, they do have to be built on foundations in order to meet, especially the wind rating. That's the biggest part of it. But so you're either putting it on a concrete slab or a timber deck, or any form of a deck, basically. If you're building on a deck, connecting services is quite substantially easier, because you can build the deck, put the dome on top, then you can connect your services where you want to put them in the dome. Concrete slabs are a little bit more difficult. With anyone who's in the building industry, they can understand this completely, that you definitely have to make sure that your floor plan for your dome is quite literally set in stone, basically, because the services will have to go in first. You don't have to connect the services, but the service, all the plumbing, the conduits, everything that needs to be in place where the interior walls are going to go. Then you pour your concrete slab, then you build your dome on top of that. Then you come in, put your interior walls, put your fittings, fixtures, and then you fill it with furniture and you're good to go. So it's the same thing applies whether you're both on or off grid. Similar to what a tiny home is. Tiny home is sitting on a trailer, so it's elevated. So all your services basically go through the floor, whether it's composting toilets, connecting to gas, for example. Sometimes they run those through the walls. The only difference is that you just go under as opposed to just straight through. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same. So it's all achievable. It's all doable.
Yeah, cool. Because I was wondering, because with tiny houses on wheels, as you mentioned, like they're usually they are on a trailer, right? So there is that raised clearance below the floor to the ground. And then some people will use a composting toilet that's a split system where you cut a hole in the floor and then there's a chamber underneath the actual home. Whereas, so with your domes, you said that they're usually on a timber deck or they're on a concrete slab. So would there still be that clearance if someone wanted to use a split system? Or I'm wondering, maybe it's just a matter of, because there is also the self-contained system where there's no chamber below the floor, but you have a composting toilet above, just within the bathroom, and then you kind of have to empty it that way. But yeah, does that make sense? What I'm asking?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. It really depends on the individual circumstance. For the most part, when people are building, if people do decide to choose a deck, for the most part, the decks would be elevated anyway, whether it's just the landscape itself, whether it's, it could be on a hill of some sort, in which case it's actually more productive to build it on a deck. Then you have substantial clearance underneath. Yes. But if you are somehow on very flat ground, you can either elevate the deck, which with, again, how a lot of the east coast of Australia is going, especially with all these rains, it's probably more ideal to get that off the ground slightly. You have that ground clearance. It's easy to connect the services. I think that's pretty much it. I was going to say a third one because it sounded nice and flowy, but that's pretty much it, really. But in terms of a concrete slab, like I mentioned before, like with a conventional house, a concrete slab should never be built on an angle. So if you aren't on a flat surface, that would need to be excavated out or built up accordingly. And that's where the services will have to go into. So when it comes to things like which will go mainly off grid, because that's what most of the people listening to this will be going through. Even if it's on or off grid, it doesn't really matter too much. But the biggest, it's not so much a hurdle, it's just something to think about, is when you have rain collection services on your property, because of the shape of a dome, you can integrate a water collection service on the ground around the perimeter of the dome if that's something that you wanted to do. So whether it's a deck or a concrete slab, there are ways to collect water using the dome itself without actually integrating it onto the dome, because then it would just kill its aesthetics. And then you'll have issues with water leakages because you have to penetrate the cover in order for those, say, guttering to stay on the dome. And then you have to try and make sure it's all nice and sealed. So we actually recommend just creating a guttering system around the perimeter of the dome, or if you have a deck, with anyone who isn't familiar with decks in any way, shape or form, all decking boards have to have gaps in between them because of the variables in terms of moisture, heat, cold. The wood flexes and it expands, and as such, you can put something like even colour-bond steel or some form of sheeting underneath it on an angle, which then runs to a gutter system. The only thing you have to be mindful of is now that the water collection is now below your structure, you have one of two options. So one, you gravity feed it down to a water tank to then pump back up to the dome, or you pump that system straight to a water tank to then gravity feed back down. Personally, I would go with the gravity feeding down to a pump and then down to a tank and then pumping it back up, simply because then you won't be able to hear the pump when it kicks on. There's sort of food for thought in that regard, and it just also depends on your particular circumstance and what your landscape around you enables you to do, basically.
Okay, no, that's good to know. Thank you for that. And you mentioned a few times already talking about council situations. So, with tiny houses on wheels, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast. I've done an episode on it too, that tiny houses on wheels are classed as caravans, and then the regulation or the rules or whatever you want to call them in each state slightly differ. And then within every council, it's either enforced or treated or interpreted differently in every single council too. And some councils are more friendly than others and all that type of thing. I'm
Yep.
wondering if, what's the situation like for these types of domes, whether it's in terms of how they're the structure of them, as well as using them for, say, temporary use versus maybe long-time living on a more permanent basis?
You can't take my words as gospel. I'm going to give it more on a general advice. Obviously, as you've mentioned, every state legislation is different. Every council is different. So this is just going to be from general advice. But so our structures fall under three classifications. So movable dwellings, temporary structures, and funny enough, tents. They're very strong, very sturdy, very high class tents, but because of the uniqueness of what they are, it's hard to differentiate them in anything other than tents. So that in some ways can really work in our favor, but in others with what's a nice way to put it with councils, just more reserved councils, I'd say, less forward thinking councils is there can be restrictions around temporary structures on properties. But the good thing about us also being classified as movable dwellings in that sort of nature, a lot of the rules, regulations, and then restrictions that tiny homes have, we also have. As a general guideline, the council, because it is classified as a tent, you can classify them as other things other than a living accommodation. For example, sheds or granny flats, or just literally a tent, like a spare bedroom on your property, something along those lines. So as a general guideline, the main differences between domes and tiny homes is because we have to be, our domes have to be situated on a foundation itself. That needs to be Australian standard certified. There are states around the country that have variable forms of exempt development, which means as long as you meet Australian standards for that particular foundation, you don't have to go through council approval. Going off, we're both in New South Wales, so using New South Wales as an example, exempt development codes in New South Wales states that depending on what the size of your property is, say, for example, we're both Sydney-based, not for long, awesome, exciting stuff, but in Sydney, you can build a 25 square meter deck less than 1 meter tall without any council approval. In rural areas, that can expand quite substantially. Every council does have variables. I've even heard of a client who had, they could build a 200 square meter pad without any council approval just because of the council that they were in. Usually it's 50 to 100 square meters, which is enough to cater for most of our size, while the 100 square meters covers all of our sizes. The 50 square meters covers everything up to the 7 meter. Unfortunately, our 8 meter is 50.4 square meters, which is a shame. As long as that foundation is up to codes, up to standards, there shouldn't be any issues. Obviously, if you are connecting to the grid, the council needs to know that connection. So for any future developments or any form of digging or anything along those lines, that you're not hitting those services, because that's obviously a bad situation. If you hit a water main, then the whole street has to shut down, and a lot of people get affected by those. And it's actually very costly to get people out there to fix those. If you're off grid though, as you mentioned before, we can do grey and black water systems need to be accounted for. One thing I do like about the regulations is that you aren't allowed to simply just dump it into the ground because it damages the environment, obviously. So there has to be provisions in place, similar to an off-grid tiny home anyway. They need to figure out their ways of their grey and black water systems. If you get things like, as you mentioned before, things like composting toilets, that really helps to eliminate the black water, because black water is definitely the most tedious process of getting it past council, because again, they just don't want you dumping it straight into the ground. But other than that, there are obviously general sort of restrictions like the zoning of your land. Typically, if you're on a rural property, most rural classifications allow for B&Bs, ecotourism resorts. Some of them are caravan parks as well, which if you really wanted to get into it, because our structures are classified as movable dwellings, they do fall under the same sort of guidelines as caravans, and in which case, again, tiny homes, which works well in our favor. Like I've heard of some councils that even have height restrictions, there's size restrictions, anything obviously bushfire prone areas. Like even a lot of tiny homes can't even match it. But unfortunately, with our structures, even though our covers are fire retardant, they're not fireproof. They're not fire resistant. If someone's having a barbecue or something, or having a fire, and then an amber falls on the cover, it's not going to engulf in flames, thankfully. But it will just melt a hole, but it won't spread that flame. If a bushfire comes through, you don't really want to be in there. It will give you enough time to basically get out. If you have enough warning, you can pack the whole thing down, depending on what size you've got. Well, not even really. It's a lot quicker to pull the structures down than it is to put them up. You could do them in a few hours to a day, depending on the size that you're doing. Especially when imminent danger is coming, you're going to be a lot quicker in what you're doing. Unfortunately, with council, well, not all councils, a lot of councils are very forward thinking, which is great. They're getting on board the whole tiny home off grid movement, which is awesome because Australia is such a big country, and for governments to service all these properties is near, it's pretty much impossible. So the whole movement towards this style of living, councils getting on board is awesome, which is why I have great respect, Lucy, that you're doing these sort of podcasts, because it helps to raise that awareness of this entire movement. When we're in the tiny homes expos, we're technically all competitors here in this environment, and yet we can all sit there, have great chats. People order food. We have beers or something along those lines, and we're just having a great time. And usually everyone comes into the domes because they're obviously massive structures, so you can fit plenty of people inside of them. But it's just such a great community, and I just can't wait for the local and state governments to slowly start getting more and more on board to make this more of a mainstream thing, because it's just such an easier way. Depends on how you define easier, but it's such a more simplistic style of living, I definitely say, which is my opinion. Everyone's each to their own, but I can't wait to finally have my own parcel of land that I can call home, and grow my own food and catch my own water, and just I don't have to pay bills and all that sort of stuff, which I'm sure most of the people who are listening to this are imagining the same sort of thing. So we're all getting there, guys. It's a long process. Anything to do with the government is definitely a long process, but once we get there, it'll be blissful. That's for sure.
It does sound like a very similar situation to tiny homes on wheels. And as you say, these conversations like we're having, and even the tiny homes expos that you've been, I think, to most of them, and I've attended as well, that this is how we make alternative ways of living and these alternative structures more accessible and more known to more people. And if anyone wants to listen to the episode on tiny house regulations, I'll put a link to in the show notes. So that was with Elle Payton, episode number 21, because I guess it would be very similar to these domes as well as you've talked about today, Jessie. And I think that, just with everything that is happening with housing, with people looking more towards a simplified way of living and wanting to be on the land, wanting to be closer to nature and slow life down and all of that, that councils are going to have to get on board. They're going to have to catch up in some way. And, we are already seeing that, obviously not maybe nearly enough, but let's see what happens in the coming weeks, months, years. And you've already mentioned a few times today that, so you've got different size dome models. I think you said you have a 10 meter, 8 and 7, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you able to just tell us a little bit more about each of the models and any features, colors? You talked about accessories and maybe even the base price ranges too.
Yep. So we have, it's essentially, it's a template range. We just call it the King Dome range. So that's basically, so we have 6 sizes in that template range. That ranges, so 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10. We missed 9 because there's not too many, like an 8 to a 10 meter. There's a substantial size difference. I think it's 26 square meters of floor space different. But going into a 9 is sort of unnecessary because you'd either pick the 8 or the 10. All of them come with, which the number of accessories will change depending on the size, obviously, because a bigger size will be able to have more accessories. But they all come with standard with obviously the frame, the cover. I did mention the press bars, which anchor the cover to the ground, all the hardware that comes with them, solar extraction fans, ventilation ports, both porthole and what we call mesh windows. The difference between the two, porthole windows look very similar to the windows that you get on yachts. Openable from the inside, they've got a glass insert with aluminium frame, makes it look nice and luxurious, basically. The mesh windows are much more simplistic, but I think very effective way to allow that wind flow to come through the domes. Basically, the name says it all. It's got a mesh screen. It's basically like a tent flap, basically. So you have to go onto the outside to open the mesh window, because if it was openable from the inside, water would be able to run off the cover and straight into the dome, which is pretty big no-no. The bay window as well, the really large window that just purely allows for light exposure to enjoy the view that you've got there. Insulation as well. The insulation and blackout curtains will come as standard. In our larger domes as well, from 6 meters and up, you can also get. Sorry, that you don't also get. You can. It does come with the price as well. Is a skylight, so you can have that beautiful light exposure, and then you can do stargazing at nighttime, especially if you have that mezzanine level in the 8 or 10 meter. You're pretty much right under it, so you get to enjoy it. We're currently in the production process of it, but we're looking at introducing an automated skylight blind as well. That people are paying good prices for glamping accommodation, or even if you're living in them yourself. You don't want to be waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm usually up at 5:30 anyway, but for people who want to have the luxury of to be able to sleep till 10, 12, it's up to you. Having something like that would be a big bonus feature as well. And then, as I mentioned as well, the wood fire stoves. So we can just supply the port only. We don't provide them as standard in this Kingdom range, simply because we service the entirety of the country. Places like Far North Queensland or Northern Territory wouldn't really be interested in having a wood fire stove. They're pretty used to the heat. Adding to that would just be a bit of a negative impact. But that one there is a $500 option. So running through the prices of our domes in terms of size. Oh, sorry. And when I say 4 meter or 10 meter, we go in relation to the diameter of the dome itself. So a 10 meter diameter, 5 meter radius, 5 meters tall. In the smaller sizes, it's not a complete sphere because we want to add that roof height. So, like say the 6 meter dome is 3 meters tall, but then a 4 meter dome, which is half, 6 minus 3 is 3, but a 4 meter dome is 2.5. So we just have that little bit more headroom. And then with the 7 meter dome, we actually go up to 4 meters because we're slowly that's introducing the means to be able to put mezzanine levels inside of. And then the 8 meter goes up to 4.7. So it's only 300 mil shorter. But in terms of pricing, so the 4 meter is everything's $999, but I'll make it a lot easier because we're not fooling anybody. The 4 meter is $13,000. The 5 meter is $15,000. The 6 meter is $17,500. The 7 meter is $20,000. The 8 meter is $25,000, and the 10 meter is $30,000. We're actually slowly bringing out our range of clear domes, which I mentioned briefly in the potential dome uses, where the entire cover itself is clear PVC, so it's completely transparent. We're still sort of juggling the prices. They will obviously be quite substantially less than the King Domes range because there's no need to have insulation. There's no need to have curtains. It's a lot more basic, more simplistic, for use for, like, as I mentioned before, cafe seating, greenhouses. You could just have a spa room or something along those lines. Something that I would not live in them. We had a 4 meter display of the clear dome at the Melbourne Expo, and we closed it right up. It was just sitting on grass, and it basically turned into a sauna. Being point blank, it turned into a sauna. It fogged everything up because of the moisture from the grass. Ended up into it. So you walk in. If you wanted to use it for a sauna, the perfect idea, but I would definitely not live in one. Live in one of those. It's just something that you can enjoy at nighttime, or enjoy in the early morning, or in the late sort of evening when you're watching the sunset. But that's not to say you can't do the same thing in the King Domes, because the 10 meter dome, for example, that window is 4 meters tall. From memory, I think it's about 8 or 9 meters wide. So it's definitely a big centerpiece to just be able to look at the beautiful view that Australia is definitely renowned for. And yeah, you just sit there and enjoy it. But that's pretty much, which we do actually, we do have custom options as well. That one there, the King Dome range, is our standard range. If you do want to alter things, for example, you can position, funny enough, because our domes are circular shaped, we reference a clock face for the positioning of the accessories. So everything's obviously within the limitations of the engineering sides of things, but we always reference the door itself as 6 o'clock on a clock face. Our standard range for our domes, the center of the large bay window is 10 o'clock, but you can move that bay window to, say, 12 o'clock. So when you walk in the door, it's directly in front of you, or you can move it to, say, 2 o'clock. And then the accessories will sort of move in relation to where that bay window is positioned. The 10-meter dome has by far the most customization. Even though we've been calling them geodesic domes, our 10-meter is actually a variant style of a geodesic dome. It's actually called a Lamellar Dome. For the keen viewers of our structures, a geodesic shape, when you're looking at every steel member on a horizontal basis, has waves in it to accommodate bringing in the dome, the walls of the dome, to actually create that dome shape, which require less sizes of members. But for this lamellar style, to give a reference point, the 6-meter dome has, I think from memory, 5 different sizes of steel struts, whereas the 10-meter dome has 15. And this is not including the going from the dome shape to the door, because anything that, if you're going from a round shape to a rectangle, so that has to be custom pieces to accommodate for those doors. But yeah, that's just to give a bit of an idea of what to expect. But with those variations the number of variations in the 10-meter enables you to have a lot more accessories. So, for example, someone wanted a yoga studio. One of the yoga studios that we built for our client, absolutely love the guys. They're up just north of Newcastle. They've actually got 2 bay windows. So you walk in because they wanted to really maximize the exposure of the environment around them. With being yoga, it's very inner peace focused. It's calming the mind, and it's good to just look out over the scenery. But you can, if you really wanted to, you could add 14 mesh windows. You could add 8 ventilation ports. You could add 8 solar fans if you really wanted to. The customizability is all there. In terms of the colors, we do have a range of colors. For the cover itself, white is our standard option, but we have, I think, 14 other colors to choose from. We are looking at introducing another 2 colors, which be interesting to see what the general population think about them. We're exploring like a eucalyptus green color. Pretty much most tin sheds, most water tanks, most any sort of outdoor style of dwelling or building is in this color. So it's like, I think the Australian eye is pretty keen on this color, so we may as well try and introduce it. So we're looking into that at the moment. We're trying to pick the right eucalyptus, and then maybe another form of a brown, just to really blend in with the natural landscape. Because we do have like a nice sand beige, which works really well. We've got photos of those. Then we've got greys. But if you really want to stand out, we've got definitely the primary colors, like just a bright red, bright yellow, bright blue, bright green. No one has taken us up on that offer yet, but the offer is there. And in terms of the insulation and the curtains as well, those colors are interchangeable. I think at least 7 different colors for each of those as well. Yeah, just to really customize your interior layout to suit you, to suit the design that you want to go for, whether it's modernistic, rustic, simplistic, or it's entirely up to you. Basically, that's why we like to just let the imagination flow with our clients, which is why we don't want to restrict them too much on how they want to lay out their domes. So yeah, that option's there. The custom option, there is consulting fees, and then fees on what the accessories are. Separate to the King Dome's range price. With the King Dome's price, that's pretty much it, plus delivery. But with the custom option, you can go to town with what you want to do. There's a lot of consulting that goes into place to make sure that it's viable. It's not going to jeopardize any sort of structural integrity, both for the frame and the cover. Yeah, the option's there. If you want to go that route, just reach out to us directly, and we can work it out from there.
Wow, so many options. It makes me really want one. And I'm kind of thinking, like, as you're talking, maybe one day when I have my own piece of land, I'd love to have one of these domes on there for sure for multi-purposes. Being a yoga teacher as well, and sound healings and all sorts of things would be really cool in there. I know a friend that's down on the South Coast that does that kind of stuff in a dome. If someone is interested in one of your domes, Jesse, so what's the process of working with you, or what's that journey look like? Do you have them on display somewhere other than when you go and do them in at the expos, or how does all of that work?
Well, we're currently trying to build. We're trying to build this network. Australia is a very big country. It's hard to service these, service these sort of places. But we are in the process of doing that at the moment. In terms of location of where people are, it really depends on our current clients whether or not they're willing to allow people to come to their properties, which is why we're currently down in the Snowy Mountains, actually building our first display slash glamping accommodation, so that people can not just have a look at them, but actually stay in them and get a feel for them to see if this is something that they want to do. Because we're totally transparent with everything. We're not afraid to talk about the pros as much as the cons as much as the pros, sort of thing. We have to start somewhere. There's talks of actually getting one up in the hinterlands up in Queensland. Yeah, we're just building that network base, nice and slow. Like I said, we've only been in business now. I think it's pretty much 18 months now. We're growing by the day, which is great because we're just meeting more and more similarly minded people, and we're just trying to make a difference together. And Snowy Mountains is the first one, so if people want to come and go for the ski season, this one should hopefully be up and running in the next couple of weeks. We're just fighting the snow at the moment. It's an interesting experience, but we're getting there, so that's the main thing.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what it looks like. And I guess you've picked an interesting time to do it, but sooner that people can obviously have an opportunity to see them in person and to stay in them, as you mentioned, I think that can only be a good thing. And yeah, it's really exciting. I love what you're doing, Jesse, and I think it's so unique. And the multiple purposes that these things can be used for opens up a whole new world for people, I think, in many different ways, not only living, but also maybe working, socializing, running different events, and so much more. So it's really cool to see. And as we start to wrap up the conversation today, is there anything that you feel like we haven't shared about what you guys do that you wanted to leave us with, or are there any other than your little project that's going on down in the Snowy Mountains? Is there anything else you wanted to share with our listeners that you're working on?
Oh, there's always works in the cards. There's always big plans, big visions for the future. Just sort of going a bit on the personal side to things. I just wanted to say with King Domes, one of the things that really mean a lot to me with King Domes, and where I really want to see it go and what it can achieve and what I can use King Domes for. I've got three pillars that really resonate with me, that I hope to use King Domes as a platform, as a stage, as a voice to be able to make a better change in the world. Because I'm not going to go too personal. I can, but I could go on for hours if that was the case. But I've had bad times in my life mentally, and nature was my form of escape to just really take in its beauty and just take in its how amazing and complex it is. Even though we look at it from a 21st century perspective of how simplistic it is, it really isn't. It's such an amazing thing that we have, and if it wasn't for the nature around us, it's we wouldn't be here. And so the three pillars that I'm really building King Domes upon is land preservation and conservation, animal welfare, and not warfare. I always mix that up. I don't know why. It's two completely different things. And then the homeless and those that are less fortunate. And, I was really trying with the Lismore floods, for example. I really wanted to try and get our structures up there to try and help them. We just weren't in a financial situation, unfortunately. And as I mentioned towards the start of the start of this talk, money is not everything, but it's a means to be able to unlock and access things that people need. Money in this world is in its an abundance, and as much as people like to think that we're wasting money in certain areas, which I'm definitely on board with that. I was just sick and tired of waiting for the government to do stuff. So this is my way of trying to make my contribution into those three pillars. And I think it integrates so well in terms of helping land around you, preserving and conserving that land, animal welfare, which it naturally does when people are building these. Typically, they're building on rural properties. That could be otherwise torn down and turned into apartments or farming land or something like that. Farming was obviously very important. I think humanity is at a stage with its technology and its advancements in life that it really needs to start looking at still generating wealth, but generating wealth in conjunction with preserving the natural environment. And I think King Domes is the start of what I can achieve personally, and what I hope my team around me can achieve, which everyone I have on board so far has got the same exact sort of vision as me. Gone are the days where we just need to start decimating entire areas, not just not even hectare. Like hectare is nothing compared to how much decimation is happening out there from the natural environment, and how many animals are going extinct and all this kind of stuff. And it's like we should be holding ourselves very much accountable for this. And there's only really a select few people that are contributing to the detriment of this world, unfortunately, and yet they're the ones that have all the cards. And we just need to do our part as individuals. It's easy to turn and say, oh yeah, but these people are doing this, and this group is doing this, or this company is doing this. Yeah, but if all of us just take a step back and just go, okay, but what can I do? What can I contribute? What can I stop doing that is detrimental to the natural world around me, and just to build ourselves up and realize that there's a lot more to this world than just money, and there's a lot more to this world than just success and all that sort of stuff. We all need to be happy, and we all need to be content with life. And I think really doing that, I feel anybody who walks out and goes on hikes, or they go camping, or even just going through drives through the country towns to go to the next town or the next city, they feel a resonance. They bring it. There's like a draw to how truly great nature is, and we are the gatekeepers for this, and we need to do what we can to build that. So whether this touches one person, 50 people, 100,000, whatever, it doesn't matter. As long as I'm just helping to be that voice to push this for the better. Because like I look at places like Singapore as an example. Singapore, it's got a larger population than the entirety of Australia, and yet its space is virtually non-existent. And yet they're still integrating ways to turn that large population into a way of which no city is perfect, no country is perfect, nobody is perfect, but they're doing a step in the right direction, which is just great. They're integrating all their skyscrapers, integrating plant life into them, and just little things like that. And it's steps in the right direction. Rome wasn't built in a day. We've been accustomed to a life so much. And I'm saying this being 25 years old, and people who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, I know it's going to be hard for them to change their viewpoints and how they've lived, but it's just baby steps. You just got to do one thing at a time, and we'll all get there. Because otherwise, there's not going to be a planet to protect if we don't change our ways. So good on you, Lucy, for doing what you're doing. Bringing awareness. Whether it's directly or indirectly. This whole industry is there. Even if people are only in it for the money, it's still indirectly there to make a change in this world. But from all the people that I've met in this industry, that's definitely not that case. It's definitely not the case at all. They want to they want to change the lives of people. They want to help the environment. They want to, just build this community sense, because, as interconnected that this world is now, it's only getting more distant. People barely even know their neighbors nowadays, and that's such a depressing world to live in. Like, what are we doing? But that's my little rant for today, and I just hope other people just grasp that and just go, you know what, we can do this. As a species, as intelligent as we are, we can do this.
We can. Beautiful words, Jesse. You're speaking my language, and I feel like you've almost opened up another can of worms for a whole other podcast, for a whole other hour or so. But we'll have to leave that for another time. But, I resonate with everything that you're saying. I'm totally on board with that. And what I'm hearing a lot is, how important it is for each of us to contribute in our own way. It doesn't have to be this massive thing on a grand scale. It can be little things that we do in our day-to-day lives. It can be, as you talked about, our neighbors, our family, our community. How are we able to give back to play our part in a healthier, more peaceful, more loving world, and, planetary healing? And if we remember that we are nature, we're not separate from it, even though it looks like in this human experience that we're here and nature and the environment is out there, actually we're all part of this same ecosystem. And when we can see it and really feel it and embody it from that place, we'll know to do better, when the next time someone maybe throws some garbage on the ground, or, whatever it might be that's not such a good thing for the earth, all the different practices and the consuming, and just all of these types of things. Like, nature is our home. It's where we came from. And each of us does have this responsibility. And even though sometimes it can be like, well, I'm just one person out of however many billion, what can I really do? But if every single person, or let's just say 10% of people in this world, and I said this on the show before, I'm pretty sure, if everyone just tomorrow made, a decision to just make one small shift, and then another one, and then another one, over our lives, just imagine how big that adds up to be. Like, these small things, or maybe we can say these tiny things, turn into big things at some point. And it is all about each of us contributing where we're able to, and picking each other up and supporting each other. And I love how you talked about a little bit before the Tiny Homes Expos, how I guess on some level people are in a sort of competitive space, but in that same space, everyone is there to be kind to each other and support and, recommend each other's services to other people. And it's not about a competition. It's about collaboration and co-creation and contribution. So I really love everything that you shared. And maybe we'll have to, we could have a philosophical discussion one day on all these types of things, because there is so much to say. And I just love also the multi-purpose mission that I can feel behind what you do with King Domes. It's not just about the business side of things. You really do care about the land, about people, about community, and about contributing to a better world. So thank you so much, Jesse, for what you do out there. Thank you for being on the show here with me today. It's been really wonderful to get to know you a bit more, to hear about your story, and to share all this amazing wisdom and what you do with everyone. So thanks again.
No worries at all, Lucy. Thank you very much for having me on board. It was definitely a pleasure chatting with you. And we have the means to do greatness. I think it's selfish of us if we don't do greatness. So we need to be the vessels out there, just whether it's a voice, whether it's anything, just to do our part. You're doing a great job, Lucy. And I thank you very much for inviting me on the show. And we could very much do another one again in the future and talk about the I think even more serious things in life. 100%.
Sounds good. Thank you so much again, Jesse. And if you're listening to us at home, make sure you go check out Jesse. Actually, one thing I did forget to ask you, where's the best place that people can connect with you online, like your website, social media?
Yep. So we've got our website, obviously. So we've got kingdomes.com.au. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. I think the Facebook one is just kingdomes.com.au as well. Just, www.facebook.com.au, .com/kingdomes.com.au. And then the same thing with Instagram is just kingdomes_leisure. We've also got a YouTube channel. It's still quite in its infancy stage, but yeah, we're growing that every day as well. So that's another channel. I think you can just search up King Domes and it should be the only one there. I think Google, that's the one problem we have with the name is Google likes to correct everything. So I'll keep trying to say, are you searching for kingdoms? Make sure you're saying, no, it's King Domes. That's what I'm looking for. But those are the best places to reach out to us. And we look more than forward to answering your queries and taking it from there.
Sounds good. I will put all of those links in the show notes. And if you're looking for those show notes, you can find them at tinyhouseconversations.com. And if you're listening to us, thank you so much for being here. As always, thank you for taking the time out of your day. Make sure you stay tuned every Thursday for new Tiny House Conversations. And I'll see you next week. Thanks again for listening. And if you enjoyed the conversation today, you found it valuable and you want to support the podcast, the best way you can do that is to share the love. That way I can keep bringing you more tiny house conversations to help you on your own tiny journey. So here are 3 ways that you can support the podcast. Number 1, if you have a friend or family member that you feel would benefit from hearing these conversations, feel free to share it with them, email them, text them, send them a telegram, do whatever you need to do to share it with them. Number 2, if you hit the subscribe button, you'll know exactly when the next episode is live. And number 3, if you head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to podcasts and leave a 5-star rating and review. Thank you so much in advance. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next episode.